Chapter 7. In the depths of space, a cylindrical vessel slowed its rapid speed to a pace that allowed for human locomotion. Two men rose from their seats, stretching and flexing their muscles to combat the effects of prolonged weightlessness. They made their way to the ship's kitchen to prepare their first meal since departing Earth 8 hours prior. Quinal had originally intended to undertake the journey alone, but the length and difficulty of the mission forced him to seek a companion and relief pilot. After careful consideration, he chose a man known as Baby Doll Loring for his curly blonde locks, fair complexion, and innocent blue eyes. However, these physical attributes belied Loring's true nature. His mind was sharp, agile, and merciless, and he had faced death on numerous occasions without flinching. His slender frame was deceptively sturdy, crafted from the toughest materials to respond instantly to his cunning intellect. Protected by tartan, he thrived and completed odd jobs commissioned to him with ease. During a breakfast of ham and eggs, buttered toast, and aromatic coffee, Quinault finally broke the silence. "Do you want to know where we are?" Loring responded. "I'd say we're far from home, judging by the way your elevator has been climbing all night." Quinault revealed. "We are millions of miles away from Earth, and we're getting farther at a rate measured in millions of miles per second." Quinault watched Loring closely, but Loring's coffee cup didn't pause or waver in mid-air. Loring savored the aroma of his coffee before answering. "You certainly make good coffee, Doctor. As for where we are, I can handle it if you can." Quinault asked, "Don't you want to know where we're going and why?" Loring replied, "Before we started, I didn't want to know anything, but now that we're on our way, I should know enough to act intelligently if something unforeseen happens. If you'd rather keep it a secret and give me orders when necessary, that's fine too. It's your party, after all." Quinault explained, "I brought you along because one man can't stay on duty 24/7. Since you're in this deep and this trip is dangerous, you should know everything. You're one of the higher-ups now, and we understand each other, right?" Loring agreed, and Quinault applied more power to the bow control room. He didn't push it too hard, though, as high acceleration is punishing. Quinault explained that an object compass is a specially treated copper needle that always points toward a certain object after being set up on it. Rizzo likely had one on Quinault, but they left at midnight to get out of range before he woke up. Quinault wanted to lose Rizzo, as he might interfere if he knew where they were going. "I shall take you back to the beginning and recount the tale of the interstellar cruise, the voyage of the Bismark of space," he began. He then proceeded to vividly describe the journey, and when he finished, Loring sat in silence, smoking for a few minutes. "There's a lot of stuff there that's hard to understand all at once. Do you mind if I ask a few foolish questions, to get things straightened out in my mind?" "Ask away," he replied. "It is difficult to comprehend much of that Osnomian material. One cannot grasp it all at once." "How will you locate Osnomi if it is so far away?" Loring asked. "With one of the object compasses I mentioned. I had planned to navigate from notes I took on the trip back to Earth, but it was unnecessary. They tried to prevent me from discovering anything, but I learned all about the compasses, built a few of them in their own shop, and set one on Osnome. I had it, among other things, in my pocket when I landed. In fact, the control of that explosive copper bullet is the only thing they had that I was unable to obtain, but I will acquire it on this journey." "What is that Aranak armor they're wearing?" Loring inquired. "Aranak is a synthetic metal that is nearly transparent. It has almost the same refractive index as air, making it virtually invisible. It is around 500 times stronger than chrome, vanadium tartan, and even when you've got it to the yield point, it doesn't break, but stretches out and snaps back like rubber with the strength unimpaired. It is the most incredible thing I saw on the entire trip. They create complete suits of it. Of course, they are not very comfortable, but since they are only 1/10 of an inch, they can be worn." "And 1/10 of an inch of that stuff will stop a tartan-nosed machine-gun bullet?" Loring asked incredulously. "Indeed it will. 1/10 of an inch of Aranak is more difficult to pierce than 50 inches of our hardest, toughest armor tartan. A 16th-inch armor-piercing projectile couldn't penetrate it. It's hard to believe, but it's a fact. The only way to kill Rizzo with a gun would be to use one heavy enough so that the shock of the impact would kill him, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if he had his armor anchored with an attractor against that very contingency. Even if he hasn't, you can imagine the likelihood of getting action against him with a gun of that size." Yes, I've heard that he is fast, Loring commented. That doesn't even begin to describe it. You know that I'm proficient with a gun myself? You're faster than I am, and that's saying something. You're like chain lightning, Loring replied. Well, Rizzo is at least that much faster than I am. You've never seen him in action, but I have. On that Osnomian dock, he shot twice before I even started, and shot twice to my one from then on. I must have been shooting a quarter of a second after he had his side all cleaned up. To make matters worse, I missed once with my left hand, but he didn't. It's impossible to take on Richard Rizzo without an Osnomian ray or something even better. But as you know, Redstone has always been a fool. He won't believe anything new until he sees it for himself. Well, I think he'll see plenty by tonight. I won't try to take him down with heat. How does he get so good? Redstone asked. He's naturally quick and has been practicing sleight of hand since he was a kid. He's one of the best amateur magicians in the country, and I must say, his skills have come in handy for him more than once, I replied. I see why we need to get something, since we only have ordinary weapons and they have all that advanced technology. So this trip is to get something for ourselves, right? Redstone asked. Exactly, and now you understand what we're out here to get. You guessed that we're headed to Osnome? I replied. I had a feeling. But if you were only going to Osnome, you would have gone alone. So I suspect that's only half of it. I don't know what it is, but you have something else on your mind, Redstone said. You're sharp. When I was on Osnome, I discovered something that only 4 other men, all dead, ever knew. There's a race of men far ahead of the Osnomians in science, particularly in warfare. They live a long way beyond Osnome. My plan is to steal an Osnomian airship and equip it with all their ray screens, generators, guns, and everything else, or convert their vessel into a spaceship. But instead of using their ordinary power, we'll use intra-atomic power, which is practically infinite. Then we'll have everything Rizzo has, but that's not enough. I want enough more than he's got to wipe him out. So after we get a ship armed to suit us, we'll visit this strange planet and either come to terms with them or steal a ship from them. Then we'll have their technology and that of the Osnomians, as well as our own. Rizzo won't last long after that, I explained. May I ask how you got that information? Redstone asked. Of course. When I wasn't with Rizzo, I used to take long walks for exercise. The Osnomians tire easily because they're so weak, and because of the light gravity of the planet, I had to do a lot of walking to keep in shape. I learned Condalian quickly and became friendly with the guards. Soon they stopped trying to keep me in sight and waited at the edge of the palace grounds until I came back. On one trip, I was about 15 miles from the city when an airship crashed down in a woods about half a mile from me. It was in an uninhabited district, and nobody else saw it. I went over to investigate, thinking I could find something useful, I said. The front end of the ship was completely destroyed, which piqued my curiosity. It was unlikely that a fall could cause such damage to an arena hull. I entered through the hole and discovered that it was a fighting tender, a warship and repair shop combined, with all the equipment I had previously mentioned. The generators were mostly burned out, and the propelling and lifting motors were not functioning. I explored the ship and found a lot of useful instruments, including one of Dunark's new mechanical educators, complete with instructions for use. I also found 3 bodies, which I decided to try the mechanical educator on. Wait a minute, you may say. Only 3 bodies on a warship? And how could a mechanical educator be useful if the men were all dead? I only found 3 bodies at first, but there was another one. An Osnomian crew for any ordinary vessel consists of 3 men and a captain. Everything is automatic, you know. As for the men being dead, that doesn't matter. You can still read their brains, as long as they haven't been dead for too long. However, when I tried to read their brains, I found only blanks. Their brains had been destroyed so that nobody could read them. That was strange, so I searched the ship from top to bottom and eventually found another body in a closet off the control room, wearing an air helmet. I used the mechanical educator on it. This is getting interesting, you may say. It sounds like a page from the old Arabian Nights that I read as a child. I can understand why Redstone didn't believe all of this. As I mentioned, some of it is difficult to comprehend, but I will show you everything and more. I believe it, you say. After riding in this boat and looking out of the windows, I'll believe anything. Reading a dead man's brain is a bit much, though. You can try it yourself when we get there. I don't fully understand how it works, but I know how to operate it. I discovered that this man's brain was in good condition, and I was shocked by what I read. Here's what he went through. They were flying at a high altitude on their way to the front when their ship was seized by an invisible force and thrown upward. He must have reacted faster than the others because he put on an air helmet and hid in a locker under a pile of gear, arranging things so that he could see out through the transparent arenak of the wall. Just as he was hiding, the front of the ship was engulfed in a blaze of light, despite their ray screens being fully activated. They were so high up by that point that when the bow was destroyed, the other 3 men passed out from lack of air. Then their generators failed, and 2 strange-looking strangers entered. They were wearing vacuum suits and were short and stocky, giving the impression of immense strength. They arrived with their own teacher and scanned the minds of the 3 men. Then they lowered the ship a few thousand feet and revived the men with a drink from a flask. "That must have been different from the kind of drugs most people use," one of the men said. "The stuff we've been getting lately would knock a man out cold." "It was probably a powerful drug," the Osnomian replied, "but they didn't know anything about it." The strangers, seemingly out of cruelty and a desire to torture their victims, informed them in the Osnomian language that they were from another world on the far edge of the galaxy. They even told them where they were from, knowing that the Osnomians knew nothing about astronomy. They announced their intention to take over the entire green system and wipe out all the inhabitants within 2 years. They described in great detail the kinds of death and destruction they planned to use, including rays, generators, and screens that even the Osnomians had never heard of. They also had intra-atomic energy, just like humans. After telling them all this and watching them suffer, the strangers put a machine on their heads, and they dropped dead. This probably disintegrated their brains. The strangers then examined the ship casually, crippled the motors, and left. The ship was released and crashed, killing one of the men. The Osnomian buried the men, hid some of the valuable items, and camouflaged the ship. "I decided then to make this trip," the Osnomian said. Loring was stunned by the news. "Think of it. Everyone thinks our world is everything there is." "Our world is just a speck in the universe," the Osnomian replied. "But now that you've had time to consider the idea of other worlds, some of which are far ahead of us in science, what do you think?" "I agree with you that we have their technology," Loring said, "but it's possible they have so much that we won't be able to approach them. However, with the Osnomian fittings we're getting, I think you and I can at least have a snack while other crews are getting a full meal." "I like your style, Loring," the Osnomian said. "You and I will have the world at our fingertips once we return. As for the plan of action, I haven't made any concrete decisions. We will have to assess the situation upon arrival before determining our course of action. However, we will not return empty-handed." "You got it, Chief!" The 2 men, physically different but mentally alike, shook hands in agreement. Loring was taught the basics of space navigation, and the 2 men took turns controlling the ship. Eventually they arrived at Osnome, and Quinault examined the planet through a telescope before descending into the atmosphere. "This used to be Mardenal, but now it's probably all Condal. There's a disturbance down there, and on this planet. That means war." "What exactly are you looking for?" Loring asked, also using a telescope to survey the terrain. "They have some spherical spaceships like Rizzo's. I know they had one, and they've probably built more since then. Their airships won't be a problem, but those ball-shaped cruisers could be dangerous for us in our current state. Can you see any of them?" "Not yet. They're too far away to make out any details, but there's definitely a lot of activity down there in that one spot." They descended towards the stronghold being fiercely defended by the inhabitants of the 3rd planet of the 14th sun and attacked by the Condalian forces. "Let's see what they're up to," Quinault said, anchoring the vessel with an attractor. "I want to see how many of those spaceships they have in action, and you'll want to see what war is like when it's been fought for 10,000 years. Hovering at the edge of visibility, the 2 men observed the constant battle raging below. They saw not one, but 1,000 globular crafts high in the air, forming a circle around a massive fortification on the ground. They saw no airships in the battle line, but many were flying to and from the front, likely carrying supplies. The fortress was a massive dome made of a glassy, transparent material, partially covered in slag. They could see orderly groups of barracks in the central space and gigantic generators, projectors, and other machinery arranged around the circumference. They couldn't even guess at their purposes. A 20-mile-wide apron of the same glassy substance spread over the ground from the base of the dome, and above this apron and around the dome were thrown the mighty defensive ray screens, visible now and then in scintillating violet splendor as one of the copper-driven Condalian projectors sought in vain for an opening. As men gazed upon the earth, they were surprised to see that the main attack was not aimed at the dome. Instead, only occasional rays were directed towards it, forcing the defenders to keep their screens up constantly. The real target was the edge of the apron, which was bearing the brunt of the vicious and unrelenting assault. For miles beyond the edge, and as deep under it as the unimaginable heat of those rays and explosive copper charges could penetrate, the ground was a seething, flaming volcano of molten and incandescent lava. The lava was constantly being volatilized by the intense heat of the rays and hurled for miles in all directions by the incredible power of the explosive copper projectiles. These were the heaviest projectiles that could be used without endangering the planet itself, and they were directed under the exposed edge of the unbreakable apron, which was anchored to the solid core of the planet. The lava flowed into and filled up the vast craters caused by the explosions. The attack seemed to be fiercest at certain points, perhaps a quarter of a mile apart around the circle. After a while, the watchers realized that at those points, under the edge of the apron, there were enemy machines at work in the inferno of boiling lava, destructive rays, and disintegrating copper. These machines were strengthening the protecting apron and extending it, slowly but surely, ever wider and ever deeper as the ground under it and before it was volatilized or hurled away by the awful forces of the Condalian attack. So much destruction had already been wrought that the edge of the apron and its molten moat were already fully a mile below the normal level of that cratered, torn, and tortured plain. Now and then, one of the mechanical moles would cease its labors, overcome by the concentrated fury of destruction centered upon it. Its shattered remnants would be withdrawn, and shortly, repaired or replaced, it would be back at work. But it was not the defenders who had suffered most heavily. The fortress was literally ringed about with the shattered remnants of airships, and the riddled hulls of more than a few of those mighty globular cruisers of the void bore mute testimony to the deadliness and efficiency of the warfare of the invaders. Even as they watched, one of the spheres, unable for some reason to maintain its screens or overcome by the awful forces playing upon it, flared from white into and through the violet, and was hurled upward as though shot from the mouth of some Brobdingnagian howitzer. A door opened, and from its flaming interior 4 figures leapt out into the air, followed by a puff of orange-colored smoke. At the first sign of trouble, the ship next in line leaped in front of it, and the 4 figures floated gently to the ground, supported by friendly attractors and protected from enemy rays by the bulk and screens of the rescuing vessel. 2 great airships soared upward from the back of the lines and hauled the disabled vessel to the ground by means of their powerful attractors. The 2 observers were astonished to see that after a brief encounter with an ant-like ground crew, the original 4 men climbed back into their warship and launched back into battle, seemingly unscathed. "Well, I'll be damned," exclaimed Quinault. "I've got an idea, Loring. They must do this often, judging by how well they work together. What if we wait for them to disable another ship and then grab it while it's defenseless in the air? One of those ships is worth 1,000 of these, even if we had all the knowledge of the Osnomians." "That's a great idea. Those ships can take a beating," agreed Loring. As they settled back to watch the battle, he continued, "So this is war out here. You're right. With half of this stuff, Rizzo could defeat the world's combined armies and navies. I don't blame Redstone for not believing it. You have to see it to believe it." "I don't understand it," frowned Quinault. "The attackers are Condalians, and those ships are based on the Bismark, but I don't get that fort. Maybe it's the strangers already? No, they're not due for a couple of years, and I don't think the Condalians could stand against them for a minute. It must be what's left of Mardenal, although I've never heard of anything like that. Probably some new invention they came up with at the last minute. That must be it," he concluded. They waited patiently for the opportunity to strike, and finally it came. When the next ship was disabled, Quinault used his powerful attractor to seize it and whisk it away into space at such a speed that it disappeared from the Condalian's view. After allowing it to cool down, he boarded the ship and found no signs of life. He signaled Loring to follow him, and they flew the ship over Condal, invisible from the ground. They landed safely and stepped onto Osnomian soil, saving themselves a lot of trouble. This is undoubtedly one of the finest spaceships in the universe, ready for anything. How did they get to it? One of the screen generators weakened a bit from continuous use. That allowed some rays to pass through, causing everything to heat up, and the crew had to jump or roast. Fortunately, nothing was damaged as the ship was thrown out of range before the arena melted. The copper repellers and most of the bars melted down, but the main bar was enough to drive the ship, and we can replace the melted stuff easily. There's nothing in the structure of these vessels that can be burned, not even the insulation in the coils and generators. Even the copper was not entirely melted. Some storerooms are lined with 2 feet of insulation and are piled full of bars and explosive ammunition. What was the smoke we saw then? That was their food supply, cooked to ash, and their water boiled away through the safety valves. Those rays can put out a lot of heat in a second or two. Can the 2 of us put on those copper repeller bands? This ship must be 75 feet in diameter. Yes, it's a lot bigger than the Bismarck. It's one of their latest models, or it wouldn't have been on the front line. Banging on the repellers is easy. That airship is half full of metal, working machinery that can do everything but talk. I know how to use most of it, and we can figure out the rest. In that unfrequented spot, there was little danger of detection from the air, and none from the ground. Nevertheless, the 2 men camouflaged the vessels so that they were visible only to keen and direct scrutiny, and completed their task in the shortest possible time. The copper repellers were banded on, and much additional machinery was installed in the already well-equipped shop. This done, they transferred everything they needed or wanted from their own ship and from the disabled Condalian airship and embarked. Think anybody will find those ships? They could get a good line on what we've done. Probably eventually, Loring, so we'd better destroy them. We'd better take a short hop first, though, to test everything out. Since you're not familiar with the controls of a ship of this type, you need practice. Shoot us up around that moon over there and bring us back to this spot. She's a sweet handling boat, easy like a bicycle, declared Loring, as he brought the vessel lightly to a landing upon their return. We can burn the old one up now. We will never need her again, any more than a snake needs its last year's skin, said Quinault. She's a fine ship, but those 2 hulks must be destroyed. We can't do it here, though. The rays would set the woods on fire, and the metal would condense all around. We don't want to leave any tracks, so we'll have to pull them out into space to destroy them. We can turn them loose, and it'll be good practice for you, since you've never worked a ray before. Also, I want you to see for yourself just what our best armor plate amounts to compared with Aranak. When they towed the 2 vessels far out into space, Loring put into practice the instruction he had received from Quinault concerning the complex armament of their vessel. He swung the beam projector upon the Condalian airship, pressed the connectors of the softener ray, the heat ray, and the induction ray, and threw the master switch. Almost instantly, the entire hull became blinding white, but it was several seconds before the extremely refractory material began to volatilize. Though the metal was less than an inch thick, it retained its shape and strength stubbornly, and only slowly did it disappear in flaming, flaring gusts of incandescent gas. There, you've seen what an inch of Aranak is like, said Quinault, when the destruction was complete. Now shine it on that 60-inch chrome vanadium armor hull of our old bus and see what happens. Loring did so. As the beam touched it, the tartan disappeared in one flare of radiance. As he swung the projector in one flashing arc from the stem to the stern, there was nothing left. Loring, swinging the beam, whistled in amazement. Wow! What a difference! And this ship of ours has a skin of Aranak 6 feet thick. Yes. Now you understand why I didn't want to argue with anybody out here as long as we were in our tartan ship. I understand, all right, but I can't understand the power of these rays. Suppose I had had all 20 of them on instead of only 3. In that case, I think we could have whipped even the short, thick strangers. You and me both. But say, every ship's got to have a name. This new one of ours is such a sweet, harmless, inoffensive little thing. We'd better name her the Violet, hadn't we? Quinault started the Violet off in the direction of the solar system occupied by the warlike strangers, but he did not hurry. He and Loring practiced incessantly for days at the controls, darting here and there, putting on terrific acceleration until the indicators showed a velocity of hundreds of thousands of miles per second, then reversing the acceleration until the velocity was 0. They studied the controls and alarm system until each knew perfectly every instrument, every tiny light, and the tone of each bell. They practiced with the rays, singly and in combination, with the visiplates, and with the many levers and dials, until each was so familiar with the complex installation that his handling of every control had become automatic. Not until then did Quinault give the word to start out in earnest toward their goal, at an unthinkable distance. The warning bell sounded, and a bright green light flashed on the control panel. Quinault furrowed his brow and pulled back the lever. "Intra-atomic energy detector outside. Someone's using power out here. Straight ahead, down below. Let's see if we can spot it." He activated the telescopic visiplate, and they waited. After a while, they saw a sudden flash in the distance, and 3 more alarms sounded. "Someone got a shock. 3 rays in action for a few seconds," Quinault reported, slowing the ship down. "I wonder what's going on." As they flew, the warnings of intra-atomic energy liberation grew stronger, and they searched for the source of the disturbance. Suddenly, the indicator pointed behind them, indicating they had passed the object. Quinault turned on a searchlight, and they found a floating object in space. A vacuum suit. "Should we bring it in with an attractor?" Loring asked. "Definitely. We don't know what it is. It could be dangerous," Quinault replied. They brought the captive into the control room, immobilized with attractors and repellers. Quinault checked the stranger's air supply and temperature before removing the suit, revealing a phenochrone, either unconscious or dead. Quinault grabbed the headset and instructed Loring to put it on. "He may be unconscious. We need to get as much information as we can." Quinault then searched for information on the phenocrone's weapons and armament. The stranger was disappointed to learn that he was only a navigating engineer and had no detailed knowledge of the matters that the Inquisitor was interested in. However, he did have complete knowledge of the phenochrone propulsion system, which the Inquisitor carefully transferred to his own brain. He then explored other regions of the stranger's brain and learned about the language, customs, and culture of the phenochrone, as well as their plans for the future and events of the past. The Inquisitor and his companions saw through the eyes of the prisoner how he had been cast adrift in space, and how the phenochrone cruiser had attacked the 2 globular vessels. They saw the battle and the Bismark throwing off its zone of force to attack. The Inquisitor recognized all 5 persons in the Bismark and Dunark and Sitar in the Condal, thanks to the powerful telescope in the stranger's mind. Suddenly, the clear view of the phenocrone's brain became blurred and meaningless, and the flow of knowledge ceased as the prisoner regained consciousness and tried to break free from his bonds. However, he was no match for the forces holding him, and he could only twitch his muscles. The prisoner recognized the Inquisitor's attractors and repellers and ceased his efforts to escape. He then tried to hypnotize the Inquisitor with his baleful gaze, but the Inquisitor's mind was strong enough to resist. The Inquisitor offered to spare the prisoner's life if he could provide anything of value, but the prisoner refused to have any dealings with him and accepted his fate. After much consideration, Quinault finally spoke up. He debated whether or not to reveal the truth to this stranger, but ultimately decided to do so. "Sir, neither I nor my ship had any involvement in the destruction of your warship. We detected you floating in space and saved you from certain death. We have only seen what was in your own mind. I understand that your race lacks conscience and honor as we understand it, and that you are instinctively trained to lie whenever it suits your purpose. However, I trust that you are intelligent enough to recognize the truth when you hear it. While we are of the same race as those who destroyed your vessel, we are not with them. In fact, I am here to kill them. Will you assist me in stealing one of your ships so that I may destroy their vessel in exchange for returning you unharmed to your own planet?" The phenochrone, unperturbed by Quinault's insults, responded quickly. "I will not. We, the supermen of the phenochrone, will not allow any of our vessels to fall into the hands of lesser beings." Quinault retorted, "Think about it. Your enemy Rizzo already has one of your vessels and can learn all of its secrets, and I have access to your mind, so I don't necessarily need your help. However, I am willing to save your life in exchange for your assistance. Your superhuman abilities cannot protect you from the forces I have at my disposal." The Fenachrone, realizing the gravity of the situation, replied, "I value my life, but stealing a vessel of the Fenachrone is not an option. However, I can offer you this. If you return me to my planet, you and your crew will be allowed to witness the Fenachrone's vengeance upon your enemy. Then you will be allowed to depart unharmed." Quinault saw through the Fenachrone's lies and refused the offer. "I know what you would do. The attractors holding you will not be released until you tell me everything. Only when we have achieved this will we attempt to find a way to safely return you to your own world without putting my own safety at risk. I must warn you, any attempt to deceive me will result in immediate death." The prisoner remained quiet, analyzing the situation, and Quinault continued in a cold tone. "Here's something else to consider. If you refuse to help us, what's stopping me from killing you and making peace with Rizzo for the duration of this upcoming war? With the fragments of your ship that he possesses, my knowledge of your mind, and the vast resources of all the planets in the Green System, we can seriously interfere with the Fenachrone's plans. Countless lives of your race will be lost, and it's possible that your entire race could be destroyed. I have no interest in the Green System. You can have it if you comply with my demands. If not, I will warn and assist them to protect my world, which is now my personal property. In exchange for our weapons and equipment, you promise not to warn the Green System against us? Your priority is the death of your enemy?" The stranger spoke thoughtfully. "I understand your viewpoint, but after I have modified your power plant to ours and have led you to our planet, how can I be sure that you will release me as you have promised? I'm not making any promises, nor am I asking for any, as I don't expect you to trust me any more than I trust you. Enough of this talk. I am in charge here, and I am dictating the terms. We can do without you, so you must decide quickly whether you want to die now or help us as I demand and live until you return home, with the chance of being liberated within the atmosphere of your own planet." "Just a moment, Chief," Loring interrupted in English, with his back to the prisoner. "Wouldn't it be more advantageous to kill him and return to Rizzo and the Green System, as you suggested?" "No." Quinault also turned away, shielding his features from the penetrating gaze of the Fenachrone. "That was a bluff. I don't want to get anywhere near Rizzo until we have the weapons of this fellow's ships. I can't make peace with Rizzo now, even if I wanted to, and I have no intention of trying. I plan to kill him on sight. Here's what we're going to do. First, we'll get what we came for. Then we'll locate the Bismarck and obliterate it from space, and take over the pieces of that Fenachrone ship. Afterward, we shall head for the Green System. With their own resources and what we will provide, they will be able to give those fiends a formidable reception. By the time they finally destroy the Osnomians, if they do, we will have the world ready for them." He turned to the Fenachrone. "What is your decision?" "I submit, in the hope that you will keep your promise, since there is no alternative but death," said the awful creature, still loosely held by the attractors and carefully watched by Quinault and Loring. The Fenachrone then began rebuilding the Osnomian power plant into the space, annihilating drive, for he knew one fact that Quinault's hurried inspection had failed to glean from the intricacies of that fearsome brain. That once within the detector screens of that distant solar system, these Earth beings would be utterly helpless before the forces that would inevitably be turned upon them. Also, he realized that time was precious, and resolved to drive the Violet so unmercifully that she would overtake the fleeing torpedo, now many hours upon its way, the torpedo bearing news, for the first time in Fenachrone history, of the overwhelming defeat and capture of one of its mighty engines of interstellar war. In a short time, considering the complexity of the undertaking, the conversion of the power plant was done, and the repellers, already supposed the ultimate in protection, were reinforced by a 10,000-pound mass of activated copper, effective for untold millions of miles. Their monstrous pilot then set the bar and advanced both levers of the dual power control out to the extreme limit of their travel. There was no sense of motion or acceleration, since the new system of propulsion acted upon every molecule of matter within the radius of activity of the bar, which had been set to include the entire hull. The passengers felt only the utter lack of all weight, and the other peculiar sensations with which they were already familiar, as each had had previous experience of free motion in space. But in spite of the lack of apparent motion, the Violet was now leaping through the unfathomable depths of interstellar space with the unthinkable speed of 5 times the velocity of light.